Please don't take my mom away. I can't lose her too. The words tore out of Emma before she could stop them. 3:22 in the morning. Desert Rose Diner on the edge of Las Vegas, neon sign flickering behind rain-streaked windows. Outside, a summer thunderstorm split the sky open, lightning cracking every 30 seconds, turning the parking lot white then black then white again. Inside, Sophia Sinclair knelt on checkered linoleum slick with blood, her hands pressed against a stranger's abdomen, fingers red and slippery, performing CPR on a man in a suit that cost $3,000 while her daughter Emma clutched her mother's waitress uniform screaming those words over and over. The man's face was gray. His pulse was gone. His 4 men in black stood frozen against the counter like stone statues, useless, watching this woman with $5 in her pocket breathe life back into their boss. Nicholas Caruso. The most powerful man in Nevada. Dying on a diner floor because his ulcer had finally hemorrhaged and not one of his trained killers knew how to save him. Sophia counted compressions out loud, her voice cracking, her son Marco sleeping in the booth 10 feet away, and she did not know this man's name, did not know that in 7 seconds he would open his eyes and lose control for the first time in his life because a nobody single mother just refused to let him die. Lightning split the sky. Thunder rolled like a hammer striking the building. The fluorescent lights hummed their dying song above them all. What she did not know was that across town, Douglas Hale was signing the final papers at his desk, papers that would have her evicted in 12 days. 12 days. The red ink on the eviction notice looked like blood against the white paper. He smiled as he signed his name, his expensive pen moving across the document with the satisfaction of a man closing a door on someone else's life. In 12 days, Sophia Sinclair and her children would have nowhere to go. The storm outside was about to trap everyone inside that diner for the next 4 hours, and when the night was over, nothing would ever be the same. But we are getting ahead. Let us go back. 18 hours earlier. When Sophia was still invisible. Sophia counted the money in her pocket for the 4th time that morning. $5. One crisp $5 bill and 37 cents in loose change. That was everything. $5.37 to last 3 days until her next paycheck, which would come to $214 if the lunch rush at Desert Rose was good, if the customers left tips, if nothing went wrong. She sat on the edge of her bed in the darkness of her apartment, a studio space that smelled like mildew and instant ramen, listening to the sounds of Las Vegas waking up outside her window. Car horns. Distant sirens. A helicopter passing overhead toward the Strip. Emma slept on a cot beside the bed, 7 years old, her breathing soft and even, one small hand tucked under her chin. In the other room, her son Marcus slept on a pile of blankets on the floor. She did not want to wake them. These quiet hours before dawn were the only time she could sit with her thoughts, the only time she could count her money and know exactly how broken everything was. The eviction notice sat on the small table by the window. She had read it 17 times. $85,000. That was the amount Douglas Hale was demanding. $85,000 in back rent and late fees and penalties and interest stacked on top of each other like a tower she could never climb. The deadline was written in red ink. 12 days. She had 12 days to find $85,000 or she and the children would be on the streets. The words swam in front of her eyes. She had read them so many times they had stopped making sense. Numbers that meant nothing because they were impossible. $85,000. That was 800 compressions on a heart that would not beat. That was 800 mornings she could not afford to survive. She stood up and dressed in the darkness, moving quietly so as not to wake Emma. Black pants. White shirt. The Desert Rose Diner uniform. The shirt had a stain on the cuff that would not wash out, coffee from 3 weeks ago. Her shoes were worn through on the right heel, the sole flapping when she walked. She had wrapped duct tape around the sole 3 times, but the tape was peeling now, gray and fraying at the edges. She could not afford new shoes. New shoes were $60, and $60 was 30 days of food for the children. The bus stop was 6 blocks away. She walked fast, her breath coming in short clouds in the pre-dawn air. October in Las Vegas was not supposed to be cold, but the desert had surrendered to the approaching storm. Dark clouds hung over the city like a weight pressing down. The wind tore at her jacket, pushing her sideways as she walked. She pulled the collar up around her neck and kept moving. The bus came at 5:47, exactly on schedule, reeking of diesel fuel and old leather seats. She sat in the back, her head against the window, watching the city transform from darkness into gray light. Desert Rose Diner opened at 6 a.m. Sophia arrived at 5:55, the keys to the side door already in her hand. The diner was a small place, checkered floor, red vinyl booths, a long counter with 12 stools bolted to the ground. Everything was old. Everything smelled like grease and coffee and time passing. She turned on the lights, switched on the coffee makers, and checked the supplies. Tomatoes from yesterday. Eggs that were 2 days old. Milk that would last until Thursday if she was careful. The manager, Dave, arrived at 6:15, already sweating through his shirt, already angry about something. "You're opening," he said. It was not a question. It was an accusation. "Yes," Sophia said. "I do every Tuesday. The storm coming in is supposed to be bad. Lightning and flooding. I'm closing early. 6 p.m. Sophia's chest tightened. Early closing meant fewer hours. Fewer hours meant less money. She did the math in her head instantly. 3 hours of lost wages at minimum wage plus tips. Probably $40 she would not make. $40 she needed. "Okay," she said. There was nothing else to say. The morning shift was slow. A trucker came in and ordered coffee and eggs. An old woman came in for toast. A businessman ordered pancakes and left a $1 tip on a $19 check. By 10 a.m., Sophia had made $12.43. By noon, she had made $19.71. She counted it carefully in her head, converting tips into meals, into bus fare, into the smallest possible increments of survival. A $2 tip meant Emma could eat lunch at school. A $5 tip meant she could buy bread and peanut butter. Nothing was small anymore. Everything was currency measured in hunger. The lunch rush started at 11:45. The diner filled with office workers and construction crews and salespeople passing through town. Sophia moved between tables like a ghost, invisible, forgotten, pouring coffee and writing down orders and bringing food and clearing plates. She smiled when she needed to smile. She said hello and thanks and have a great day. She made herself empty so that people could pour their needs into her and walk away satisfied. By 2 p.m., when the rush ended, she had made $43.15 total. 63 cents per hour worked, if she was lucky. No tips on 3 tables. Short tips on 5 others. A businessman who ordered a $42 lunch and paid with a $50, telling her to keep the change like he was doing her a favor. $8 for 3 hours of standing and smiling and pretending that the exhaustion in her bones was not real. Dave told her she could leave at 4 p.m. instead of 6. The storm was coming faster than expected. The sky had turned the color of a bruise, purple and green and angry. The wind was picking up, pushing at the diner's windows like something alive, something wanting in. Sophia took off her apron and counted her tips one more time. $43.62 for the entire day. She needed to eat. She needed gas for the bus pass. She needed to buy milk for the children. $43 would not be enough. She was walking to the bus stop when she noticed the black SUV parked across the street. The windows were tinted. The engine was running. 2 men sat inside, watching. Watching what, she did not know. Watching her, maybe. Or just parked, just waiting. She had learned not to ask questions about things like black SUVs and men who watched. Questions got you noticed, and being noticed was dangerous in ways she could not afford. The sky opened up at 4:32 p.m. Rain fell in sheets, turning the street into a river. She ran for the bus shelter, her duct-taped shoe flapping against the pavement. By the time she reached it, she was soaked through. Her uniform clung to her skin. Her hair dripped water down her neck. She stood in the shelter with 3 other people, all of them silent, all of them staring out at the storm like it was a wall they could not cross. The bus did not come at 5. It did not come at 5:15. At 5:30, a bus arrived, but it was full, packed so tight that people were pressed against the windows. Sophia stepped back and let it pass. Another group of people crowded into the shelter, bringing the smell of wet hair and desperation. 63 cents per hour, she thought. That was what her life was worth. That was what she was making while the storm raged and the city went grey and the eviction notice sat on her table at home counting down the 12 days she had left. At 5:45, the power flickered. The shelter's light blinked once, twice, then died. Darkness fell across Las Vegas like a curtain being drawn. Lightning lit everything white. In that moment of brightness, Sophia saw the black SUV was still parked across the street. The engine was still running. The men were still watching. Then darkness came again, and they were invisible once more. She did not know that in that SUV, one of those men was on the phone with Nicholas Caruso, telling him that Douglas Hale was moving faster than expected, that the eviction was happening in days not weeks, that something needed to be done immediately. She did not know that Nicholas Caruso was in his penthouse apartment, bleeding internally, his stomach ravaging itself from years of stress and violence and the weight of running an empire. She did not know that in approximately 40 minutes, a pain would shoot through his abdomen so severe that he would collapse, that he would need someone to save him, and that someone would be her. She did not know any of this. She only knew that she had $43.62, that she had 12 days, and that the storm outside was getting worse. The bus finally came at 6:11 p.m. Sophia climbed aboard, soaking wet, her $5.37 still in her pocket, and sat in the back where no one would look at her. The rain hammered against the windows. Thunder rolled across the sky. The bus lurched forward into the storm, carrying her toward an appointment with fate that she had no way of seeing coming. Outside, the lightning cracked the sky open again. Inside the bus, Sophia closed her eyes and counted her heartbeats. Survival. That was all life was anymore. Counting heartbeats and counting dollars and counting down the days until everything disappeared. 12 days left. $85,000 needed. $5.37 in her pocket. And somewhere in the storm-dark night, a man was bleeding, a man was dying, and in 90 minutes, she would be the only person who could save him. 6:47 in the morning. The summer heat already rising off the pavement like invisible fire, and Sophia Sinclair was already walking. For miles. That was the distance from her studio apartment to the Bellagio Hotel, where she cleaned rooms for $11 an hour before tips that never reached her hands. For miles through Las Vegas at dawn, when the city was still half asleep and the tourists hadn't yet flooded the strip. Her backpack weighed 14 pounds. Inside it, one uniform, one water bottle she'd refilled 6 times from the apartment tap, and for granola bars broken into quarters for Emma and Marcus. She had counted the calories. 135 calories per bar. Divided 4 ways, that meant 33 calories of protein for each child before school. It was not enough. It would never be enough. Her shoes were held together with duct tape. Grey duct tape wrapped around the sole of the left one, silver tape around the right, a patchwork of repair that held for now but wouldn't hold much longer. The blister on her left heel had opened again. She could feel it with every step, a small wet heat that would turn to infection if she wasn't careful, and infection meant antibiotics she couldn't afford, so she wrapped it tighter and kept walking. 2,300 steps to the main strip. She had counted them months ago and now she counted them every morning, a meditation of numbers that kept her mind away from the ache in her legs, the hollow feeling in her stomach, the weight of everything she was carrying that had nothing to do with the backpack. The sun climbed higher. By 7 a.m., the temperature was already 87 degrees. By 7:30, when she passed the first casino, it was 92. Her uniform was already dark with sweat before she'd even started her shift. The humidity clung to her like something alive, pressing down on her shoulders, and under the collar of her shirt, she could feel the scars there. 8 scars. She had counted them in the mirror once, a long time ago, and she had stopped counting after that. Douglas's voice in her memory, 3 years old now but still sharp as broken glass. Nobody will believe you. Nobody ever believes a woman like you. I know every cop in this district. I own them. She pushed the voice away and kept walking. The Bellagio lobby was all marble and crystal chandeliers and the kind of quiet that came from obscene amounts of money. Sophia entered through the service entrance, her security card hanging around her neck, and clocked in at 7:58. 14 minutes early, unpaid. She always came early. The other women did not. Her supervisor, Patricia, was a woman in her 50s with professionally styled blonde hair and eyes that did not focus on Sophia's face. Patricia was the kind of woman who had never counted dollars or worried about blisters or wondered if today's meal was going to be enough. Patricia said, 17 rooms today, East Wing, priority cleaning, we have a wedding party checking in. She did not say thank you. She did not say anything else. Sophia pushed her cart through the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed with the sound of electricity burning, and her reflection passed in every polished surface, a ghost in a grey uniform, 32 years old but looking like someone who had lived through decades. Room 2847 had been slept in by a businessman who had left a $50 tip on the nightstand. She found it as she was wiping down the desk. $50. Her hand shook as she reached for it, and then she heard Patricia's voice in her head. Housekeeping doesn't get tips, Sophia. That goes in the team pool. The team pool meant she would see $5 from that 50. The businessman had given her an invisible gift that would transform into something smaller, something less, something that barely mattered. She left the money on the nightstand and cleaned the bathroom instead. The toilet had not been flushed. She flushed it and kept working. By noon, she had cleaned 17 rooms. Her back ached. Her knees ached. The blister on her heel had stopped hurting, which meant it was worse. She sat in the staff bathroom on the break, in front of a mirror surrounded by fluorescent lights that made everything look like a disease. Her shoulders were visible through her thin work uniform. The first scar started just below her left collarbone, ran diagonally to the middle of her back. The second was shorter, newer, from when he had pushed her into a door frame. The third and fourth ran parallel to each other, 2 inches apart, from when he had used a belt with a buckle. She did not look at them for long. The water from the tap ran cold. She cupped it in her hands and drank, refilled her bottle, and went back to work. Lunchtime came and went. She did not eat. The granola bar quarters were for Emma and Marcus. She drank water instead, and when her stomach started to hurt, she drank more water. Pain was just a signal her body was still alive. She had learned to ignore it. At 2:14 p.m., she left the Bellagio and walked to pick up Emma from school. The afternoon heat was now at 102 degrees. The air felt solid. Her daughter was 7 years old, with Sophia's dark eyes and her father's lighter skin, a beautiful child who should have been playing in air conditioning instead of waiting in the pickup line with her backpack that cost $12 from the thrift store. "Hi, Mommy," Emma said, and Sophia's heart cracked a little, the way it did every time her daughter used that word. "Hi, baby. How was your day?" "Good. We learned about oceans. Can we go to the ocean?" Sophia's throat tightened. "Maybe one day, sweetheart." Emma took her hand. Her hand was small and hot and perfect, and Sophia squeezed it gently. From school, they walked to the daycare where Marcus, 4 years old and built like his father, was waiting with his shoes on the wrong feet and a smile that held everything Sophia lived for. He had knocked over a cup of juice during snack time. His teacher had cleaned it up without complaining. He hadn't eaten the snack. Sophia's stomach did a small, painful calculation of what that meant for dinner. They walked to the grocery store because the bus cost $3 and she had $5.37 total, which meant she needed to choose carefully. $3 for the bus meant $2.37 for food. She bought a loaf of bread for $2, peanut butter for 97 cents. That left 40 cents. She bought apples on sale, 3 for the price of 2. Emma asked if they could get juice boxes. Next week, baby, Sophia said, and Emma nodded like she believed it, and Sophia died a little inside at how easily her daughter had learned to accept disappointment. They took the bus home. The driver knew Sophia's face. He always looked sad when she got on. She did not know why until much later. 7:30 p.m. Their studio apartment was one room with a kitchenette, a bathroom with a shower that only worked if you jiggled the handle, and walls so thin they could hear their neighbors fighting through them. Sophia made peanut butter sandwiches. She cut the apples. She poured milk from a carton that was 2 days from expiring. Emma and Marcus ate like they were starving because they were starving, and Sophia sat at the small table and watched them eat and did not eat herself. The knock came at 8:47 p.m. 3 hard raps on the door. Sophia's entire body went still. "Mommy." Emma's hand touched her arm. "Go to the bathroom," Sophia whispered. "Take Marcus. Close the door." She waited until they were hidden, until she heard the lock click, and then she opened the door as far as the chain would allow. Through the gap, she saw Douglas Hale's face. She had not seen him in 3 years. He looked exactly the same: expensive haircut, expensive shirt, expensive cologne that smelled like betrayal. He was smiling. "Hello, Sophia." She did not open the door wider. "I have some documents for you." He slid an envelope through the gap. It was thick. Official. She knew what it was before she pulled it through. Her hand shook as she opened it. "Notice to vacate." The words were printed in bold. The amount was written in red ink. $85,000. 11 days to pay or surrender the apartment. The property manager had signed. The court stamp was real. She read it 3 times, the words not making sense, the numbers being impossible, the deadline written in red ink like a threat. "You owe me, Sophia," Douglas said through the door chain, his voice casual, almost friendly. 8 years of my life. Now you're going to pay me back. Every dollar. Every penny." He paused. "You cost me everything. Now I'm going to cost you everything." She did not respond. She could not respond. She closed the door and locked it and slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor with the eviction notice in her hands. 11 days. $85,000. $5.37 in her pocket. At the same hour, across the city in a marble-floored penthouse apartment on the Strip, Nicholas Caruso was reading medical reports that said his hemorrhaging ulcer was getting worse. The doctor's handwriting was careful and clinical. The prognosis was clear: any day. Any moment. His stomach was destroying itself from the inside, and there was nothing medicine could do except delay the inevitable. He was 44 years old. He had survived 4 attempts on his life. He had buried 2 men who betrayed him. He had built an empire that stretched across Nevada and into California and Arizona. But his body was betraying him, slowly, inevitably, like a wound that had never properly healed. On his desk was another file. His younger brother, Matteo, had been seen at the Moretti family restaurant 3 times in the past week. 3 times. Meeting with enemies. Discussing something. Planning something. The photographs were clear. Matteo's face, smiling, sitting across from Carmine Moretti, the man who had tried to kill Nicholas 7 years ago. Rocco entered without knocking. His lieutenant was tall, built like a concrete wall, with the scar tissue of old fights mapped across his knuckles. Behind him came Dario, younger, sharper, with eyes that missed nothing. "The Hale situation is escalating," Rocco said. He did not sit. He's moving faster than expected. The eviction on the woman is happening in 11 days now, not the planned 2 weeks. He's pressuring the court. Using his connections. If we don't move, she'll be on the street by next week. Nicholas did not look up from the medical report. What does the woman know? Nothing, Dario said. She's completely isolated. No family. No money. The ex has isolated her from everyone. She works double shifts at the Bellagio. Cleaning. Minimum wage. She has 2 children. He paused. The paperwork shows she never pressed charges for the abuse because she couldn't afford a lawyer. She couldn't afford to fight him. Nicholas felt something cold and dangerous stir in his chest. The pain came suddenly. A knife, twisting, internal. He gripped the desk and tried to breathe through it. The ulcer was bleeding again. He could taste blood in his mouth, copper and salt and the flavor of his own mortality. Get me to the car, he said. Bosses, we should call. The car. Now. They moved fast. Out of the penthouse, into the private elevator, into the black SUV waiting in the underground garage. The pain was getting worse. Nicholas could feel his body shutting down, his vision starting to blur at the edges, and he wondered, just for a moment, if this was it. If this was how it ended, not in a hail of bullets from a rival family, but bleeding out internally, alone in the back of a vehicle. He didn't know that in approximately 40 minutes, he would collapse in a fluorescent-lit diner. He didn't know that a woman with nothing left to lose would save his life. He didn't know that his entire world was about to change. All he knew was the pain and the darkness creeping in at the edges of his vision, and the sound of the engine as the SUV pulled into traffic, heading toward a destination that fate had already determined. In the studio apartment, Sophia sat on the floor with the eviction notice in her hands. Outside, the storm was building. The wind was picking up. Thunder rolled across the desert sky. She could hear her children in the bathroom, whispering to each other, scared because Mommy was scared. 11 days. $85,000. $5.37. And somewhere in the storm-dark night, a man was dying, and he did not know that she would save him, and she did not know that he would change everything. The fluorescent lights hummed their tired song above the Desert Rose Diner, a sound like insects trapped in plastic, as Sophia Sinclair's feet screamed inside shoes held together with duct tape and hope. It was 11:47 at night on a Wednesday, and she had been awake for 19 hours straight. The eviction notice crinkled in her apron pocket every time she moved, folded and refolded so many times the paper had begun to tear along the creases. Red ink. 12 days. $85,000. She did not own $85,000. She did not own $8,500. She owned $5 and some change, and it had to stretch to Friday. The diner was nearly empty, a long-haul trucker in booth 3 nursing black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, a woman in the corner booth with a laptop and the hollow eyes of someone working a graveyard shift of their own. Sophia moved between tables with the mechanical precision of someone running on fumes, her movements economical, every gesture designed to conserve energy. In the back booth, Emma and her brother slept tangled together like puppies, Emma's worn coat serving as a blanket because Sophia had forgotten to bring theirs from the car. Her son, Marco, was 7. Emma was 5. They had stopped asking questions about why they had to sleep in diners and cars weeks ago. Sophia approached a table to clear empty plates when the front door opened with a sudden violence, the wind from outside pushing against it like an invisible hand. 4 men in black suits entered first, moving with the coordinated precision of soldiers clearing a room. Their eyes scanned the corners, the shadows, the exits. Their hands rested near their jackets in a way that made the trucker in booth 3 suddenly very interested in his cold coffee. Then he walked in. Nicholas Caruso filled the doorway like a question that demanded an answer. He was tall, at least 6'2", with the kind of broad shoulders that came from wealth and power, the kind that made expensive suits look designed specifically for him. His hair was dark, shot through with silver at the temples in a way that made him appear distinguished rather than aging. But it was his face that held the diner still. A scar ran from the outer corner of his left eye down to his cheekbone, thin and precise like it had been carved there intentionally, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds just before lightning breaks through. He wore a suit that cost more than Sophia made in 6 months, the fabric so fine it seemed to catch light differently than normal cloth. He sat at the counter without removing his suit jacket. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she approached with menus. The way his men had scanned the room, the way they positioned themselves, she recognized the choreography of danger, had learned to read it in 8 years of living with Douglas Hale. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Nicholas looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. His eyes held hers, and in that moment Sophia felt seen in a way she had not felt in years, as if he were looking past her uniform and her blood-stained apron and her trembling hands and seeing something underneath. He opened his mouth to answer. Then his face went grey. His hand gripped the counter edge, knuckles turning white as bone. His other hand pressed against his side, and when he pulled it away, his fingers were red. Blood. Actual blood, spreading across the checkered linoleum floor like spilled wine, dark and urgent and impossible to ignore. "Boss, we need to go," Rocco said, but Nicholas waved him off with the stubbornness of a dying man who refused to admit it. Outside, the summer thunderstorm that had been building all evening finally broke. Lightning split the sky with a crack that shattered across the desert like the sound of the world breaking, and rain came down in sheets, hammering against the windows with such force that the glass seemed to bow inward. The temperature in the diner dropped instantly. Wind howled around the corners of the building. Nicholas collapsed. His head hit the counter first, then his body slid sideways, and he fell to the floor in a motion so complete, so absolute, that it took everyone a moment to process what they had just witnessed. These 4 men in suits, trained killers all of them, stood frozen. They had been prepared for bullets. They had been prepared for betrayal. They had not been prepared for this, their boss, unconscious, bleeding, dying on the checkered linoleum of a diner at 3 in the morning. Sophia moved before thought could stop her. She dropped the menus. She was on her knees in the blood, her hands pressing against the wound on his side, feeling the heat of him, the desperate leak of his life spilling out onto her fingers. "Call 911, she screamed at no one, at everyone, at the universe itself. "Call an ambulance, call someone, he's dying." Rocco fumbled for his phone but his hands were shaking. Dario stared at his boss as if expecting him to sit up and laugh, to explain this was some kind of test. The trucker in booth 3 had abandoned his coffee and was pressing himself against the far wall. Sophia's hands worked on instinct. 2 years ago, after Douglas had broken her collarbone, she had taken a free CPR class at the community center, hoping it might lead to a better job, a job that paid enough to leave him. She had paid attention to every detail, had practiced on a dummy, had earned a certificate she kept taped to the refrigerator. She had never thought she would use it. She used it now. Her hands pressed against his chest, counting compressions in her head, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. His ribs were solid beneath her palms. She tilted his head back, cleared his airway, breathed into his mouth and tasted copper and salt and the flavor of his own mortality. "Emma," she called toward the back. "Stay in the booth with your brother, do not move." Emma was already awake, crying, her small voice cutting through the sound of the storm. "Please don't take my mom away. Please, she's all I have." Sophia kept working. Compressions, breaths, compressions, breaths. The siren grew louder, coming closer through the storm, a sound like the sky was screaming. Rocco was on the phone now, giving directions, his voice steady in a way his hands were not. 1 minute passed. Then 2. Nicholas's body jerked beneath her hands, a response, some kind of response. His eyes were still closed. His skin was cold and turning grey, but when she checked for a pulse, there it was, faint and irregular but there, proof that the machine of him was still running. The ambulance arrived with lights that turned the diner blue and blue again, flashing across his unconscious face, across Sophia's bloody hands, across Emma's terrified eyes peering over the booth seat. "We've got him from here," the paramedic said, and Sophia moved back, her legs unsteady, her entire body trembling from adrenaline and exhaustion and the weight of having just pulled a stranger back from the edge of death. Rocco watched her as the paramedics loaded Nicholas onto a stretcher. His boss. The most powerful man in Nevada. unconscious and bleeding and dependent on the CPR of a single mother who earned minimum wage and worked night shifts. Rocco had been with Nicholas for 15 years. He had never seen anything like this. "What's your name?" Rocco asked. "Sophia," she whispered. "Sophia Sinclair. You saved his life." Sophia shook her head. Anyone would have done it. But Rocco knew that wasn't true. Anyone wouldn't have. Almost no one would have. But this woman with blood on her uniform and fear in her eyes and a child crying her name from a booth in the back, she had. As the ambulance pulled away into the storm, its siren fading into the sound of thunder and rain, Sophia stood in the fluorescent-lit diner surrounded by blood and chaos, her apron soaked, her hands shaking, her pocket still holding the eviction notice with its red ink deadline. She did not know that the man she had just saved was Nicholas Caruso. She did not know that he owned half the city. She did not know that in 37 hours she would wake up in a marble mansion that looked like a palace built from ice. She did not know that her life, already broken, was about to shatter into an entirely different shape. What she did know was the cold of the night outside, the howl of the wind against the diner's walls, and the weight of Emma's small hand tugging at her sleeve, asking if everything was going to be okay. Sophia pulled her daughter close and did not answer because she no longer knew how to lie convincingly. Behind the counter, abandoned on the tile, $5 bills lay scattered, all she had in the world. By morning, they would be gone, swept away, forgotten. Everything she had was about to change. The storm raged on outside, indifferent to the small miracle that had just happened, to the woman who had refused to let a stranger die, to the children who would soon find themselves living in a world they did not recognize. The rain fell in sheets against the windows. Thunder rolled across the desert. And in the back of an ambulance, Nicholas Caruso's eyes remained closed, his life hanging by threads that a waitress in a diner had just refused to let break. The rain fell in sheets against the driveway, turning the marble entrance of the Caruso mansion into a river of silver and shadow. Sophia Sinclair walked toward the guest house carrying grocery bags, real groceries, not the dented cans she used to steal from the back of the supermarket, and her heart was lighter than it had been in 8 years. The job interview had gone well. Better than well. Nicholas had arranged it with a legitimate company, a position in their administrative office, $40,000 a year, benefits, a future that didn't involve counting tips at 3 in the morning while her feet bled into her shoes. Then she saw him. Douglas Hale stood next to his car in the circular driveway, leaning against the hood like he owned the place, wearing that same smile that had terrified her for 8 years. The grocery bags fell from her hands. Oranges rolled across the wet pavement. "Did you think you could hide?" His voice carried across the empty space between them, casual as a comment about the weather. "Did you think some rich boyfriend would protect you from reality?" Sophia's mouth went dry. She took a step backward, her shoes slipping on the wet stone. "Leave. Now. You're trespassing." Douglas laughed. The sound was exactly like she remembered it, cruel, confident, utterly certain of his own power. He stepped toward her, closing the distance. "You owe me $85,000, Sophia. Did you forget? 3 days left on that deadline. And I know you don't have it. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to come back with me tonight, and you're going to work off that debt, and those kids of yours." He paused, his eyes glinting with something predatory. "They'll be fine. The foster system isn't so bad." Sophia's voice cracked. "Don't you dare." The mansion side door opened. Nicholas Caruso walked out into the rain without a coat, his white shirt immediately soaked, his dark hair plastered to his skull. Rocco and Dario moved silently behind him like shadows given form. Nicholas took in the scene in a single glance, Sophia backed against the car, her face white with terror, the predatory stance of the man advancing on her. His expression didn't change. His eyes went absolutely still. "Who are you?" Nicholas asked, his voice level as stone. Douglas turned, and for the first time, his confidence wavered. He'd heard rumors about Nicholas Caruso, but standing in front of him was different. The man was 6'3", built like a weapon, with a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone and hands that looked like they'd broken 1,000 things. But Douglas had money. He had police. He had lawyers. "Douglas Hale," he said, straightening his jacket. "I'm Sophia's landlord. We have a financial arrangement that she's defaulted on. This is a civil matter, not your concern." Nicholas looked at Sophia. "Is this him?" She couldn't speak. Her body answered for her, the way her shoulders hunched, the way her breathing shallowed, the way every muscle in her frame had gone rigid with trauma response. Nicholas turned back to Douglas. "Leave my property." "Your property?" Douglas laughed again, that same cruel sound. "She's got a legal eviction notice. I've got cops in my pocket who'll enforce it." "You can't. You put your hands on her." Nicholas's voice dropped to something deadly quiet, something that made the air itself seem to compress. "Not a question. A statement. A law being declared." Douglas's laughter died. "That's not. For 8 years, you made her afraid to sleep in her own home. You threatened her children. You broke her spirit because you could, because she had no one to stand against you." Nicholas stepped closer, each movement controlled and deliberate. "I'm not going to touch you, Douglas. That would be too merciful. That would give you an escape." Douglas moved toward his car. Rocco stepped into his path, blocking the door with his body. 200 pounds of muscle, a face that had seen violence and dealt it in equal measure. Douglas's voice cracked. "You can't do this. I have rights." "I have?" Nicholas raised his hand. Just his hand. One gesture, nothing more. 12 men in black moved like ghosts from different positions around the property, from behind the fountain, from the garage, from the shadows of the garden walls. They'd been there the entire time, invisible, waiting. Douglas spun, trapped, the trap suddenly visible now that it had closed. A second set of black SUVs pulled through the gates. 4 men stepped out, their suits expensive but worn, their faces scarred with the kind of violence that came from working in the darker parts of the city. Not Nicholas's men. Something worse. The head enforcer, a man with a thick neck and dead eyes, nodded at Nicholas. "This the one?" "He contacted the Moretti family to get past my security," Nicholas said, his voice still level, still quiet, still terrifying in its certainty. "That makes him part of their organization. That makes him my problem to handle over to you." Douglas's face went white. Not just pale. White like a skull, like all the blood had drained down into his feet and evaporated. "No. No, wait. I just needed," his voice was begging now, all the cruelty stripped away, leaving only a terrified man who'd finally understood what he was facing. "Please. I'll tear up the eviction notice. I'll leave her alone. I'll disappear. Just please." The Moretti enforcer grabbed his arm. Douglas struggled, screaming, thrashing, but he was no match for 3 men who'd spent their entire lives hurting people. They dragged him toward the unmarked van, his shoes scraping across the marble, his voice breaking into incoherent pleas. "You had 8 years to be a better man," Nicholas said, watching him disappear into the darkness of the van. The door slammed shut. The vehicle pulled away into the rain without lights, without sirens, into the kind of silence that meant Douglas Hale had just stepped into a different kind of world, not death, not yet, but something that made death look like mercy. Nicholas turned to Sophia. Rain streamed down his face. "He can't hurt you anymore. No one can." But Sophia didn't hear the promise in those words. She heard only the truth underneath. She was now entangled with a man who erased his enemies like they'd never existed. She was safe because she belonged to him. And that safety came with a price she wasn't sure she could afford. That night, the summer thunderstorm returned with fury, and Sophia stood alone on the guest house balcony while lightning cracked the sky into pieces. Rain soaked through her thin shirt. Her hands gripped the railing so hard her knuckles turned white. She'd been awake for 43 hours, and her mind was spinning in circles: escape, stay, run, surrender, disappear. She'd traded one prison for another. At least with Douglas, she understood the rules. This, Nicholas's world, his protection, his debt, was a cage made of silk and diamonds, and she didn't know if she'd ever leave it alive. Through the guest house window behind her, Emma laughed at something on television. A real laugh, the kind that came from a child who'd eaten today and would eat tomorrow. Sophia closed her eyes and held onto that sound the way a drowning person holds onto driftwood. She didn't leave. The next morning, a social worker arrived with Evelyn Blackwell. The woman swept through the mansion's main hall like she owned it, her blonde hair perfect despite the rain, her designer suit immaculate, her smile sharp as a knife's edge. "Miss Sinclair," the social worker said, her voice dripping with false concern, "we've received reports that your children are living in an unsafe environment. An environment involving organized crime and violence. I'm going to need to take them into protective custody." Sophia stepped forward. 8 years of fear had calcified into something harder, fury. "My children have eaten every day this week. They sleep in clean beds. They go to school. They are safer now than they've ever been." Evelyn's smile widened. "Really? Living with a man who murders people? What kind of mother allows her children to be raised by a criminal?" Nicholas emerged from the study. His voice, when he spoke, was ice cutting through fire. "Evelyn, leave." "I'm protecting these children," Evelyn said, her eyes never leaving Sophia's. "From you. From your world. From the destruction that follows you everywhere." Sophia's voice shook but didn't break. "I know exactly who he is. He's the man who saved my life when people like you walked past me bleeding and pretended I was invisible. So take your fake concern and your bought social worker and get out of this house." The social worker, realizing she'd been played, quietly excused herself and left. Evelyn's mask slipped. For just a moment, Sophia saw the malice underneath, the fury of a woman accustomed to winning, facing someone who'd decided not to play the game anymore. Evelyn turned to Nicholas, her voice dropping to something venomous. "This isn't over. She'll destroy you. She's already making you weak. If you come back here," Nicholas said, "it won't be a conversation." Evelyn left. But Sophia knew, standing in that marble hall surrounded by Nicholas's men, that this wasn't finished. Evelyn Blackwell was the kind of enemy that didn't disappear quietly. She was the kind that struck in the darkness. 2 days later, federal agents moved in at dawn. Evelyn's penthouse was surrounded by black SUVs with no markings, and she was arrested in her silk nightgown, handcuffed, her face collapsing as the reality hit her. Her father's criminal empire, money laundering, bribery, witness intimidation, had been exposed. Evidence, all of it, provided by Nicholas to the FBI in exchange for immunity. 40 years federal prison. Total financial ruin. Her family's name destroyed in 72 hours. The news cameras caught her screaming, her perfect makeup running, her certainty shattered like glass. Not death. That would have been too quick, too merciful, too easy. This was systematic, total, absolute destruction. This was Nicholas teaching her what happened when you threatened the woman he loved. Sophia watched the news from the mansion's living room, Emma asleep against her shoulder, her son drawing pictures of the garden outside. She understood, finally, that she was no longer nobody. She was the reason the most powerful man in Nevada had moved. She was the reason an empire had fallen. The rain continued to fall outside, gentle now, the storm finally passing. And Sophia held her children close and allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind them. 1 year later, Sophia Sinclair stood in the corner of a ballroom filled with 500 people, her tailored charcoal suit catching the light, her spine straight, her voice steady as she told a room of strangers about the night she almost lost everything. She didn't mention the Mafia boss. She didn't mention the mansion or the men in black SUVs or the systematic destruction of the man who'd tried to own her. She simply told them about survival. About counting $5 like it was gold. About walking for miles to work in the dark because she couldn't afford the bus fare. about holding her children and whispering promises she didn't know how to keep. The audience was silent. Absolutely silent. The kind of silence that means people are listening with their whole hearts. Sophia's voice didn't tremble. Not once. She'd learned how to be strong in a way that didn't require anyone else's permission. When she finished, the applause was like thunder rolling through the room, and Sophia stood there accepting it with the quiet dignity of someone who'd earned every word she'd spoken. She stepped down from the podium and disappeared into the crowd, her security detail waiting discreetly near the exit, because even though Nicholas wasn't in her life anymore, he'd made sure she was never unsafe. The penthouse belonged to her. Completely. $187,000 down payment, paid from the salary she'd earned as director of operations at Caruso Enterprises. The job was legitimate. Nicholas had made sure of that, legitimizing his entire empire over the past year, moving money through real estate and technology and philanthropic foundations. No one whispered about it anymore. The Mafia didn't exist in the daylight. Emma was asleep in her room down the hall, homework finished, nightlight glowing soft pink in the darkness. Her son was in his own bedroom, a ceiling covered in glow-in-the-dark stars Sophia had helped him place, one by one. Sophia stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse, looking out at the Las Vegas Strip burning like a circuit board beneath the night sky. Neon blues and golds and deep purples reflected in the glass. She held a glass of red wine, something she never drank when she was poor, never let herself have, and she thought about everything she'd built in 12 months. $60,000 a year had become $95,000. The apartment had become this penthouse. The shame had become pride. The nobody had become someone. But the emptiness was like a blade wrapped in ice, cutting through the celebrations and the promotions and the way people now looked at her with respect instead of pity. The buzzer sounded at the ground floor. Sophia didn't need to check the security monitor. She knew who it was. She'd known it was coming. Nicholas Caruso didn't do random visits. She pressed the button. Send him up. The elevator hummed, ascending. 70 stories. Sophia didn't move from the window. She heard the doors open, heard his footsteps, measured, deliberate, the same footsteps that had walked through corridors of power for 20 years. He was taking in everything. The art on her walls. The books on the shelves. The photographs of Emma and her son. The evidence of a life he hadn't built for her, but rather the evidence of a life she'd built despite him, because of him, in spite of him, she still wasn't sure which. Nicholas Caruso was 6 feet 2 inches tall, broad-shouldered beneath a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her first month's salary. His dark hair was silver at the temples now, or maybe it had always been that way and she'd been too terrified to notice. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they were watching her with an intensity that made her chest tight. He wore a gold wedding band on his left hand. She'd never seen him wear it before. The speech was extraordinary, he said. His voice was low and solid like an oath, like thunder moving across a distant sky. Sophia turned from the window. You were there. In the back. You didn't see me because you were too busy commanding that room. He took a step toward her, and Sophia fought the urge to step backward. She stood her ground. I've been watching you work this year, Sophia. From a distance. Making sure you were safe. Making sure no one touched you. Making sure Douglas Hale's name disappeared from every record, every database, every place it could haunt you. I know, Sophia said quietly. Your reach is long, Nicholas. Not as long as I wanted it to be, he said. Another step closer. I wanted to reach into this penthouse and pull you back. 1,000 times I wanted to. But you didn't. But I didn't, he agreed. Because what kind of love would that be? To save someone and then cage them. Sophia's hands were trembling. She set the wine glass down carefully on the side table, the red liquid catching the city lights. Why are you here? Nicholas closed the distance between them slowly, giving her time to ask him to leave, to tell him to go, to set a boundary. He didn't. He waited. And when he was close enough that she could smell the cologne on his skin, something dark and expensive, like cedar and stone. He reached into his jacket pocket. The ring caught the light first. Emerald cut, surrounded by diamonds, set in white gold. It was the most beautiful thing Sophia had ever seen, and it wasn't because of the cost. It was because of what it meant. Choice. The ability to say no. The security of knowing that someone was asking, not demanding. That she had power in this moment. I spent a year learning how to be a man who deserves you, Nicholas said, and his voice cracked. This man who commanded armies, who ordered deaths, who moved through the criminal underworld like a ghost, his voice cracked like glass. I spent a year making sure you could stand on your own. And I realize now that was the easiest way to love you, because it didn't require me to be vulnerable. It didn't require me to risk anything. Sophia couldn't speak. I love you, Nicholas said, and the words were like something breaking inside him, like a dam he'd held shut for so long finally giving way. I have loved you since the moment you woke me up that night, refusing to let me die, fighting for a stranger like your own life depended on it. I love the way you've built yourself. I love the strength in your spine. I love that you don't need me anymore, and I'm asking anyway if you want me anyway. Sophia's eyes were burning. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. Yes, she whispered. You didn't let me finish. I don't need to hear the rest, Sophia said. I've spent a year becoming someone I'm proud of so I could stand next to you as an equal. So yes, Nicholas. Yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Of course it did. They kissed as lightning split the sky outside, another summer storm moving in from the desert, rain beginning to hammer against the windows. Sophia felt the storm inside and outside her body, the electricity of it, the release of it, the promise of it. 6 months later, on a beach at sunset, Sophia stood in a dress that covered the scars on her back, not because she was hiding anymore, but because she'd chosen something beautiful. Nicholas wore a simple charcoal suit. Emma was the flower girl, dropping rose petals with the seriousness of a child carrying something precious. Her son was the ring bearer, the gold band catching the last light of the day. Rocco and Dario stood as witnesses, 2 men who'd served Nicholas Caruso for 15 years and still couldn't quite believe he'd chosen vulnerability over control. I vow to see you, Nicholas said, his voice steady now, no longer breaking. To really see you. Not as someone I saved, but as someone I'm honored to walk beside. Sophia spoke her vows with the clarity of someone who'd learned her own worth. You lost control for me twice. Once when I saved your life in that diner. Once when you told me the truth tonight. I promise to be worthy of that vulnerability every single day. I promise to choose you the way I chose life itself when everything was dark. They married as the sun melted into the ocean, as the sky turned purple and gold and deep indigo. And when it was finished, when they walked together down the beach with Emma and her son running ahead, building sandcastles in the twilight, Sophia finally understood what it meant to be home. She'd survived poverty with $5 in her pocket. She'd survived abuse and terror and the certainty that she would die unnamed and unremembered. But survival wasn't the victory. The victory was this. Walking freely. Choosing freely. Being seen, completely, without apology. If you're watching this and you're in darkness right now, if you're counting pennies or hiding bruises or wondering if anyone on this earth sees your strength, I need you to hear this: you are not nobody. Your survival is extraordinary. Your strength is real. And when you meet someone who honors that strength instead of exploiting it, you hold on. The storm will pass, and you are far stronger than you think. How did this story make you feel? Please leave a comment below and share what is in your heart. If you enjoyed this, hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. Share this with someone who needs to hear it.